Hey everyone, this is Marjory Wildcraft back at you with a whole nother interview. And this one, again, really interesting solutions based. So, if you remember, I was in Mexico a few weeks ago at that gathering of anarchists, and I happened to run into Carla. I'm going to have to bring her on and have her give you her last name correct. I've already forgotten it. I just asked her, who is living up in New Hampshire. And the reason that New Hampshire is so interesting is it's called the Free State Project. And I remember watching this like 25 years ago. And the idea was, and I don't know when they started, but that's when I watched. And the idea was that if you got enough people together, that everybody moved to one state and you started to take over the politics and you could take over the entire state, which would eventually lead to secession from the United States and create your own reality. And I ran into Carla. Actually, she was doing some of the emceeing for the event. And we also met at the airport. I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever because it's still going on and it has made some amazing strides. So I'm going to bring Carla in. And hi, Carla. Welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad I met you at the airport and we got to hang out in fabulous Mexico because you're all sunny and tan and I'm back in my sweaters.
Yes. Yeah. Right. You're getting some of that not record freezing temperatures because we have global warming, right?
Yes,
It's right.
yes.
You're right. Oh my God, the narratives. Carla, how do we pronounce your last name? Let's get
So
that
it's
correct.
it's Gericke. It's actually
Gericke.
Gericke. It's South African. That's
Gericke.
where I'm originally from. No one can say it. So I picked the way the first guy said it at the airport. So we're going with Carla Gericke. Yes.
Gericke. It sounds good. I mean, who would have thought of a last name like Wildcraft? So there we go.
I love it. It's beautiful.
I do too, actually. So you live in New Hampshire, right? The Free State Project. And I think you heard on the intro, I gave just a real quick thumbnail sketch of the background. This is the coolest project ever. I mean, if I weren't like a native born Floridian uh, who's terrified of the cold, I would be over there in a heartbeat. But why don't you give folks like just the high level overview of the history of the project?
Sure. So the Free State Project, we've been around for just over 20 years now. So it is sort of going into its second generation, which is exciting to see that it's been successful. It's kind of moved out of an experiment phase into a, hey, we're really doing this phase. So basically, in a nutshell, it's a geopolitical movement of mass migration, right? So we're basically saying people who share our values, which is basically small limited government, lower taxes, more personal autonomy, freedom, wherever you're on the spectrum. I would say from minarchist, like you think we should have a little bit of government, but let's keep them in check, all the way to, as we were there at
In
Acapulco,
Acapulco. Yeah.
uh, the anarchists. So it's basically a movement to try and concentrate like-minded people who share the same values in one geographic area. The area that got picked is New Hampshire. I know it's not everyone's favorite because of the cold, but honestly, I'm from Africa and I can hang with the cold. We have these things called heaters, like in the same way that people run from, air
Okay.
conditioning to air conditioning in the hotter climes. We do function in the winter and it's fine. You can adjust.
I get it.
So
Yeah.
I'm like, if you love liberty, buy a sweater. You know what I'm
I
saying?
got it. So I do remember when the Free State Project was starting to go, and you always watch these things and you're like, wow, is that going to happen or not? And there was like some kind of a voting process, but the Free State Project for a while there had the most complete database on all of the 50 states, comparing them on everything that you could, like homeschooling laws and how tight or regulated or free were they, or home birthers, or guns and weapons, control or not control. Another key thing was population, right? So it's
Hmm.
going to be a lot easier to take over New Hampshire with a smaller population than it would be to take over, California with what, I don't know how many millions they have, 50 million now or something. So
Right.
that was another thing. And then there were other things that I found really fascinating, like New Mexico. Another thing was you were looking for you didn't necessarily want to be in the middle of the country because then you're landlocked and surrounded by the rest of the United States. You were looking for an ocean or another border. And New Mexico was a strong candidate for a while there, except in New Mexico, they get like for every dollar in Federal Reserve notes that they pay in taxes or revenue, they get like $2 or $3 from the federal government back in all kinds of different subsidies. So you know that that population has an adherence and a loyalty to the federal government because that's where a lot of their pockets are getting lined, or basically so many people on so many of those programs, they would be reluctant to let that go. So it was just a fascinating thing. And then they picked New Hampshire.
So, I mean, we picked New Hampshire because it is fairly low population. We have about 1.3 million people here. It is a low tax state. We don't have any sales tax. We don't have any personal income tax. We actually passed a law 2 years ago to taper dividends and interest tax, so truly income tax free in 2026. That will go down to zero. So it is a place that people could look at if they're looking for wealth protection. But, we wanted a place which, candidly, the way I like to describe it is, I'm building my own little country. I know it sounds mad in some
No,
sense, but it is also a really simple way for people to understand sort of what we're doing, right? So we have this little country. It has a northern border with Canada. We have a deep sea port in Portsmouth. We do have some coastline, probably not enough. Maybe one day we'll have to annex Maine. But, we
that would
have
be the
this,
next one. Yeah, that would be.
there's
Yeah.
mountains, there's sea, there's rural living, there's city living. The biggest city in in New Hampshire is Manchester. That's where I live. Um, I have just under an acre. I have some backyard chickens as well. We built a community garden here, but the city itself only has about 120,000 people, so it's small,
Yeah.
just the right size, but it's an hour from Boston. So if you want to go see a cool show or, get the culture or whatever, it's possible. Montreal's a couple of hours north, 2 3 hours north, depending of where you're going. So in terms of thinking about New Hampshire as this like tiny little country, it's like a Luxembourg or a Switzerland or
Yeah.
a Croatia. There are these tiny Iceland would be 4 times the size of the population of Iceland, and no one's going, Iceland can't be a country.
Yeah.
And so the notion, of course, wasn't always, hey, we're going to make a tiny little country. The idea was, as you said, if we concentrate like-minded people together, maybe we can actually affect change, right? I think one of the things that appeal to both of us is we're solution driven. Like, I
Yeah.
don't just want to talk about stuff. I actually want to make things happen, right? Even if it's just my own life, my own health, my friends, my family, incrementally, we know we start from where we are and then we kind of build it up. And so here we are in New Hampshire. It's been 20 years. They took the vote back in 2003. And that
Yeah.
was basically deciding between, 10 likely candidates. But to your point and to my point, New Hampshire won out. So it is this really strange little state. The state motto is live free
Live
or
free or
die.
die. Yes, I
It's
know
right
that's
there.
it's right there in the motto. I know. I thought, well, that was totally perfect too. So my son Ryan, hey Ryan, normally you give a shout out to your mom, but I'm giving shout outs to my son. So I was talking to him about, I said, I'm going to interview this lady, Carla. She's up in New Hampshire. It was really interesting. And he said, well, how, if they don't have any income tax, they don't like property taxes must be out the wazoo because you got to pay for government somehow. So how does the, government work when there's no sales taxes and no income tax and things
Right.
like
So,
that?
and that
Yeah.
is a legitimate question. So, it is property taxes. Property taxes are relatively high as compared to other states, but two thoughts on that. One is the tax burden in New Hampshire is still, I think, bottom five in the United States. So our tax burden is still very low. And because it's a property tax and it's a line item, New Hampshire is actually really quaint the way it still runs. We have a state house, a Senate, and then a governor, right? The Senate is 24 people. It's usually split, it's currently split 10-14 Republican to Democrat. The House has 400 sitting legislators in a population of 1.2 million. So
Wow.
each rep pretty much represents like 3,300 people. You know your reps. You see them at the grocery store. You have their cell phone on dial. It really still is this sort of representative relationship. So on top of that, most towns still have town hall meetings. In fact, this weekend, a lot of them are doing that. And that is where they show up and they have their town budget, they have their warrants, and some towns they go through it line item by line item. So when you're hitting that property tax number, which goes predominantly to the schools, then people are, when you put up property taxes in New Hampshire, people know, like they're pretty careful about it because there is a direct relationship between taxing your people and people getting mad and kind of looking at, hey, where's my money going? What are you taxing me for? Why did this go up? What is happening? Right. And
So,
so,
yeah, so this sounds like probably one of the most corrupt free governments on the entire planet. Like, how would we say that? Honest or high integrity governments on the planet, because I mean, certainly can't say that here in Puerto Rico. This place is more corrupt than even the mainland. So
no, and it's so fascinating to me because, I'm an immigrant. So when I came to America, it was very interesting to me to sort of see the naivete maybe of Americans in some ways. Like I remember someone explained to me how K Street, how lobbying works in America, right? And they explained it to me and I was like, "Oh, so you guys also just are corrupt and it's just bribery and corruption." And they were affronted and they were like, "No, it's a business." And it's like, and I was like, but just take the words away, take the word lobbying away. And let me tell you, if I come from an African country and I say, well, there's this business, if you pay me $100,000 or $1 million, I think I can get this bill or this concession or this incentive for you. We call that bribery and corruption. We
yeah,
don't
right,
do it
totally, yeah,
here,
right, yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah, I get it. Oh my gosh. So the property tax, but there's still, the property taxes are still lower than a lot of other places, even though, so you must be running a very efficient, what are some of the items of government that you don't have? You were talking about, for example, cameras on street corners and things
Right.
like we're headed into the ultimate surveillance state. What are some of the things that have been cut out because you clearly can't afford them?
So certainly I think people run really lean. Towns, I mean, predominantly most of the funds that are raised in New Hampshire are spent on the schools. And, we're spending a ludicrous amount of money as it is across the nation, especially when you look at, if you're paying $20,000 per kid in school, I would expect them to be able to read when they're 10 years old. I mean, I don't think that's like too much to
Yeah,
ask
right. Yeah,
for,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so here in New Hampshire, it's the same as everywhere. I would say, the majority of money is spent on schools. The other part is, who will build the roads? I mean,
Right.
that is
There's
the
the roads
question that
question. We're going to
happens.
get to that. Yeah. Yeah.
So that is, of course, a place, so sort of infrastructure, upkeep, that kind of stuff. I would say the policing used to run pretty lean, and there's some fascinating, great stories, as you may well imagine, over the years with Free Staters doing innovative and creative things in different towns. There's one town, the town of Croydon. That's kind of where my besties live, and they have an off the grid farm and they supply most of Free Staters in the States meat. We get really good quality meat. That's really something that can't be overstated as we build out this community here. And I'm sure you've seen it in different places where one lives. I'm going to ramble a little, but bear with
Sure.
me here.
Sure.
So in
Sure.
2020, we did our Pork Fest. It's our Porcupine Freedom Festival, and it's a sort of annual event, right? And much like I think in Acapulco kind of had theirs in February, early before things locked down, and then in June, I was just like, well, I'm not going to cancel my party. I've had it for 20 years and I'm having my party like I always have my party. And
Yeah.
everyone was like, you can't, it's banned, it's, their mandates, all of that. And I was like, I don't care. It's a First and Second Amendment protected assembly.
You got the
We're
free
going to
speech
gather,
going.
we're
Yeah.
going to get together, right? So the town of Croydon folks, of course, always come to that as well. And they've just done this documentary series. And so the folks in Croydon have managed to do So at PorkFest, this kid came running towards me and he was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe like you're letting us be here and have fun and not be stuck in the house and everything." And then,
Yeah.
and then the story of Croydon came out. And that year, what they did is they cut their school budget by 50% at a town meeting like the one that's coming up this weekend. And that really started a conversation of, hey, how much money should we be spending on the kids? Because people don't want to answer the questions like, but why does a Montessori school cost $8,000 per kid per year, a private school where you can read when you leave?
Yeah.
But these government schools are charging double that and not providing what they are telling us they should provide. This town of Croydon also cut their one-man police force.
Okay.
Totally, because they were like, we don't, a town of 800 people in a fairly rural area, there isn't really crime. I mean, New
That's true.
Hampshire,
You don't need a cop, right?
you
Yeah.
don't. Like you could
Yeah.
use, so what they have is they have like a exchange program with the state trooper program. So like if there is some kind of actual emergency, which hardly ever happens, right? It's really an exception, not a rule. um they have a town rule with the trooper, so someone on a state level will come in. But that poor police officer got so butthurt when he got fired that
Oh,
and I'm not even making this up, he disrobed into his skivvies to leave his uniform at the town meeting and left and started walking down a march road, meaning there was snow on the ground, in a huff because his job had been eliminated. Now, I actually kind of felt bad for the guy, right?
yeah. Yeah.
But on the other hand, my point being, when you have people who say this is enough, or we don't need these things, or let's radically think about how we should be funding education. And maybe that conversation starts with, oh, we're going to do something that sounds shocking to get people's attention, and then actually have those hard conversations. So, Croydon, I'm just going to give them a shout out because
Yeah. Hey,
if you
Croydon,
ever come visit us, if you come for Pork Fest or something, I'd love to introduce you. I think you'd really enjoy them. We were all at a hockey match together a couple of days ago. But yeah, so it's a lean government is the short answer. We're spending way too much on education, and that is actually something we want to fix. And I think the long-term goal is to try and reduce those property taxes in ways that make sense. And one of those ways, of course, could be privatizing services. I argue with progressives in the state all the time. And one time I was up at the state house, and I mean, Marjorie, it felt like I was in a meme war. It was like they were yelling, like, who will build the roads? And we were
yeah,
yelling,
right.
who builds the roads? And they're
Yeah.
like, what do you
People,
mean?
people
And
build.
I'm like, no,
Yeah.
literally, who builds the roads? And they were so confused. And eventually I was like, people. So we agree, people physically build a road. So now let's take the notion that it must be government people and just go with someone knows how to build the roads. Could we pay that someone to do it? So I think part of the evolution that's going to happen here in New Hampshire is this, hopefully, this movement towards understanding there are services that are valuable. I'm a free marketeer. I'm a capitalist. I believe in those things. So if it's something that's valuable, someone will provide it, and then we will pay for it. So the way I like to help people understand it, because we're in such an app-driven life, right? So
Mhm.
government, there's an app for that. Like
There's a time for
if
that.
right? So
Yeah.
if snow plowing or trash collecting is so important that we have to pay these massive pensions, I'm like, but the private sector could do it for less money. We could use an app you could call when you wanted the service. It's just we've been conditioned to think about the world in these
Yeah.
boxes, and I'm ready to break out of the box and do something exciting and new.
I've got another great example of that. Is for a while there, I was looking in the Ozarks pretty heavily as a place to relocate to, and I think it's Westfield, Missouri. It's a lovely little small town, and they had they're like an hour or two, more than an hour from Springfield, which is the nearest big place with like a real hospital and stuff
I
like
have
that.
been to Springfield, Missouri. My sister
Yeah.
lived near there.
So anyway, these people, they were really concerned, and they wanted to have a helicopter be able to take you to the hospital in Missouri if you needed it. And so one of the families there got it all together, and they said, hey, we figure out, like, if we charge this much a month and we have this many people who are interested, and it was something really cheap. It was like $16 a month if you wanted to subscribe to this. And if you that included like an airlift a year or something like that, right?
Wow.
Or whatever you need, maybe an airlift every 2 years. But in other words, you had an airlift to get out of there very, very quickly if you or someone in your household needed to get to the hospital. And they very, very successfully made a whole business out of this. They have
Wow.
helicopter pilots on standby. They have a helicopter on standby. I think actually it got to be so successful that they ended up doing this for a lot of other rural areas, and it became a bigger and bigger company. But I mean, we can figure stuff out and do it. We don't need a
And
government, right?
no, I'm an attorney by training, and I practiced in South Africa and California and Silicon Valley back in the tech days. And I just recently got my real estate license here in New Hampshire because I was like, oh, okay, I've just hired a new ED for the FSP, so for the Free State Project. And I was like, okay, I want to move on and do some other things. But I was also like, yeah, maybe I can finally make some money after pitching in for 20 years. I need a plan here. And I'm so shocked. I shouldn't be, but I am at the barriers to entry for these professions. I was like, it probably cost close to 2 grand just to get the license and to keep the license and to do the continual
The continuing ed.
education and
Yeah.
like all these things. And you see it so clearly where it's like, wow, this is a government protected monopoly,
Mhm.
which is the same thing we see in the health industry, of course, with doctors. That's why during COVID, they did not want to speak out. It's why we have so many rotten lawyers.
Yeah.
It's just you create these professions that are licensed by the government that basically means you're now the government's lackey, and that's a
Mhm.
very polite term that
Yeah, I've got a few other words, but yeah.
and you're making it harder for just smart people with hustle to get into the game. Like, there's no reason why someone shouldn't just be able to sell a house, right? Do you really need to know, I don't know, the Water Act of 1952's lines of whatever the
Right. The disclosures and yeah,
yeah,
getting a mortgage now is like, it's like a phone book of, I used
it's
to do a lot of real estate, and the title agency always hated it when they said when they got a reader. It would be somebody to read all the documents, because
right.
you said it takes days to read all the documents. And so because of all the different things, I totally get it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
so
and I heard you were talking about, like, there's a lot of businesses now that are using crypto or using precious metals, or already shifting out of the US dollar for a currency.
yeah,
Um,
so I mean, we were really kind of the initial hotbed, I would say, of crypto. The Free State Project as an organization started accepting crypto in, I want to say, 2011. I mean,
wow.
I bought my first Bitcoin for $6. I had no idea what it was, but I was at PorcFest at the Porcupine Freedom Festival, and there were all these nerds, and they were like so excited, and I was like, sure, put it on my phone. What do I have to, that kind of situation.
Yeah.
Luckily, my husband is actually like is linearly minded enough to like have kept track or whatever. Otherwise,
Right.
like,
Another one of the lost Bitcoin, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure I've lost many. I'm not even going to think about it. But we really were an initial hotbed for crypto. There are people I know here, present company included, that have been living off crypto for many years. I mean, you can buy your meat with it, you can buy your water with it. You can, we have a robust community that will operate that way. We have a really great silver dealer, Silver Dave. Like, he has, a store. I think he has a reality TV show now, if I'm remembering correctly. We do gold, silver, barter, all of it, right? So those alternatives. So it's really interesting. The community in a lot of ways is developed into, I want to say, like 3 or 4 pots. And there's a big crypto community. There's a sort of civil disobedience community, but honestly, most of those people have now been sort of arrested and hurt, or just,
Yeah, no, I get
it's
it.
not
Yeah,
an
yeah,
inconsiderable
yeah.
area, uh, to be on the front lines of. And then obviously we have a lot of entrepreneurs, but then we also have like a really big politico kind of wonkish group. So you have all these different people, and there's a lot of agorism and sort of off the grid and building out health and alternate medicine, like a lot of that. But then there's also, people who are literally like, let's write a law and make DAOs legal. Let's get small nuclear reactors to be legal in New Hampshire. Let's try that. Let's look at flying cars or banning CBDCs. Like, there's a lot of just like really
Innovative ideas
dynamic.
going in.
Yeah, people
Yeah.
are experimenting. Like, we don't. Sometimes people forget this. Everyone wants to be like, well, if you're anti-state, you must have an answer for everything. And it's like, no, here's the answer. Life is a journey. We're not going to have all the answers. What we're doing is we're experimenting. But when we find things that work, let's trend more in that direction. And statism, sadly, is like you trend in the wrong direction. We protect the worst ideas, and then they become so entrenched that they're almost impossible to shake out. So now we're at a stage where, some crazy gray-haired lady from Africa is like, let's secede from America and make
Yes.
our own country.
So I've heard that you're like presenting that you actually have a political position. You've gotten elected to. Are you a representative or a
No,
senator?
so
Or
I haven't actually been elected,
okay,
but I ran for Senate now 3 times. I started in 2016. When I started, I've run Republican or Republican Fusion Libertarian Party.
okay,
And I started in 2016. I got like 35%, I think. Like, I was a total unknown, whatever. But that 35% was purely because I had an R behind my name. But over the years, it's gone up, and I've gone up 10 points, and I would have won in 2022, but they gerrymandered my district out. And I run openly as I am. Here is how I am. I talk about the ideas I care about. And, to circle back to that live free or die ethos, the people here aren't fools. Like, we understand there's something wrong with DC. I mean,
oh, yeah,
I'm sorry. I don't think it can't be reformed. It's rotten, rotten, rotten,
it's
rotten,
so
rotten.
bad. Yeah, I just did an interview with Max Lowen, who is a survivor of the abuse that the people at the highest levels of our world do for fun. And it's just you just when you get done listening to that interview, you're just like, there's no saving this thing. It's got to, and it is collapsing. It's got to collapse, because man, that is just sick. What they If you begin to look at what's underneath there. But another misconception, so I've gone to Anarchapulco 2 years now, and I've really gotten into like, what does anarchy look like? And I think the program that we've all been told is anarchy is chaos. It's Mad Max. It's everybody running around with guns, and you don't like somebody says something bad, just shoot them. Or that's actually not at all. Anarchy is really kind of like the of true meritocracy, from what I could see. And Anarchapulco, astonishingly well run, very well organized, and that team was incredibly resilient when things were thrown at them, like, oh my God, the taxi cabs have just all striked. Or, oh my God, we don't have electricity. They're like by flashlight doing their team meeting, you know. Actually, you were may have been there at the speakers thing. Like, they were like, "Okay, and please," and we're there the afternoon before, and they're like, "Please don't step over there on that concrete pad. It will be dry by tomorrow morning." Like, I mean, they're just getting stuff done.
Yep.
Um, and so yeah, so that I and it sounds like, you're moving more toward a true anarchist type of, or you're moving more toward anarchy and away from government.
I think
Would you?
that I mean, there are, labels are interesting because oftentimes if you label yourself, even, we as rational, logical people, I like definitions. I like that words have meaning and that we could actually have cogent conversations if we agreed on the definition of the word, which
Oh,
is how, society used to work until they started changing the definition of
all
words
word,
real
yeah.
time online to be like, oh, that's not what a vaccine means anymore. Viruses don't work like that. We don't know what natural immunity is, like whatever, right? That's kind of where I gave up, honestly, as a lawyer, when I started seeing court cases being decided where they were literally being like, the words would say, including but not limited to, and they'd say, well, it's limited to, or saying, oh, we're going to just take this wildly non rational definition. We're just going to make a new definition of a word, right? So anarchism gets a bad rap because our enemies want to give it a bad rap, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But the reality is, and I think I did a Velociraptor meme about this many, many, many moons ago, probably 10 or 12 years, because that's such an old meme now. But, if you stack up the crimes of the state, right? The global crimes of the state, let's be
Yeah.
conservative and say it's like 220 million people. And that's a very low conservative estimate for the 20th century. There were only 9 million private murders. So, just on the face of it, we could
Yeah.
say, well, anarchism by and large by itself would say that we would have less deaths in the world if you just let all the sociopaths shoot each other. But here's the reality. In New Hampshire, which has very favorable gun laws, and it is actually something that Free Staters do take seriously. Like when we did Pork Fest, um, I did say it's First and Second Amendment protected assembly because we are a very heavily armed,
Populous,
polite
yeah.
society over here. But it also levels the playing field. People always ask me, why hasn't PorkFest been raided yet? And I'm like, I think it's because half the people are armed. And if you were a state agent, is that really like what you want to go do, right? Like they like to shoot women in the back from far away. I don't think anyone really wants to roll into a high combat situation. And I'm not saying any of that to front. I'm saying the reason people like me recommend that people carry guns is because an armed society is a polite society. And if we want an anarchist society, or we want a society where we're all taking personal responsibility for ourselves, then you should be taking responsibility for your own safety. And so you should have a way, whether that's bear mace, or maybe you're like a ninja and you can do like jujitsu or whatever it is, right? But for some of us, it's a firearm, and it is purely there as a defensive mechanism if something is necessary to be protected, right?
Well, that what you said about polite is absolutely true, because I'm not carrying now. I feel safe. I don't feel like that's something I need to do. But when I was doing carrying, I tell you what, when I have my own loaded handgun on the back of my, in the back of my back there, I am the most polite person on the planet, because I really do not want to get into any kind of altercation,
Right.
because I know what I'm carrying and I know what I'm capable of. And I'm just I'm really the nicest I'm way nicer than I even am otherwise, So it does. Yeah, I totally get it. I wanted to riff a little bit on words. So a word that has just annoyed me forever, and I don't know when they began to do this, is democracy.
Mm.
And one great example is a girlfriend of mine, and she's kind of completely unaware of what's going on, and she's talking, and we were talking. I said, "Oh, no, no, we don't live in a democracy." And she said, "No, no, that's your opinion." I said, "No, that's actually a fact. We do not live in a democracy. I don't know where why they keep repeating this over and over and over again with every talking head, all the movies that we're fighting for democracy. We don't live in a democracy. And she's like, that's your opinion. I said, okay, I'll give you two things to prove it to you. And for those of you that are watching that don't believe this, these will prove it to you too. The first is the CIA fact book. Go there, and which actually is a pretty decent website. They just have all these facts of every country in the world, and right there under the United States, they'll say, well, most people commonly believe that the United States is a democracy. Actually, it's an elected republic. And so that's the first thing. And we all know the CIA may or may not be whatever it is. But so the second thing is, I said, here, why don't you do this, Cassandra? Put your hand over your heart from when you were a kid in elementary school and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. It's not to the democracy for which it stands. Anyway, she was very quiet for a while after that, and then went on with her life, but I could tell that I had planted a seed. So
Yeah, and I actually call it demockery at this stage,
democracy.
right?
Yeah.
Because to your point, it's America has an electoral college. That's sort of part of the republicanism of it, the way it's set up. And there
That's
isn't a one person, one vote,
no.
but there's a strong push. Do you know about this? I actually got invited out to like a junket. So it's coming from like the Republican and the Democrat side to try and push to change it away from the electoral college to one person, one vote. And I guess the thinking there is they want it to not have the purple states or the divided states. They don't want all the money pouring in there. So people are, I mean, in the end, here's the reality, or the best way for people to understand that democracy is not actually also an attractive system. Yes, it's one of those words that, we have all this propaganda around it, and it sounds pretty, right? It sounds like, oh, that is what we want. But democracy is literally,
mob rule,
right? Two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner.
Yeah.
If you're the sheep.
Socrates is the classic historical example of why you don't want a democracy. And in ancient Greece, they were very, very civic minded. I mean, they would have a jury of 501 citizens, right? It was very, very kind of a little bit more like a flavor of New Hampshire. Like people were engaged in local politics. And Socrates was a bit of an oddball, right? He's a philosopher and coming up with new, like, crazy ideas and thinking of things. So some people got really upset about that and said, you're corrupting our youth or whatever. And basically, a majority of people ruled that he should be put to death. And then hence he drank the poison hemlock. But it basically is mob rule. And I think everybody looks at that historical example and says democracy is not a good system. So
I mean, anyway. No one likes it when this is pointed out, and I hope this doesn't ding you on any of the platforms, but like the democratic socialists in Germany in the 30s, democratically elected. Like people also get confused because they think that, oh, if it's, if the government, if 50% of people voted for it, then it must be right? And so people confuse morality and legality, which we shouldn't do because, of course, slavery was legal but not moral. And we see so much of this happening now where people are just, ironically, it's almost like we replaced religion and the notion of a god or an omnipotent person watching, or omnipotent being watching you, right? Which I think was like a magic sauce to make us all behave a little better.
Yeah.
But now they've just done it with the state, and we've created this fear of this omnipotent state that is watching us. And now, sadly, because of technology, of course, they kind of are.
They are. You were talking about some of the like the personal surveillance concerns that are going on everywhere, but there's some pushback going on in New Hampshire.
Yeah. So, I mean, first I'll say I'm very proud. I personally was arrested back in the day, like in 2010, for filming cops during a traffic stop. And that actually went all the way to the First Circuit. So that's like just the court, the the courthouse right below the Supreme Court. So this actually affected 13 million people. And, the case shockingly had to go that far just to say that we as private citizens do have the right to record our public officials in the execution of their public duties. This happened to be, roadside at night. And the state literally argued, well, the Constitution doesn't work on the side of the road after dark because that's an inherently
Really?
dangerous situation. And I was like, I think you're wrong. And I think I'm going to fight you all the way, and
Wow.
did. So back then, let's say 15 years ago, we were actually, at least creating some rights for us. I mean, imagine you didn't even have the right to film them back, right? Because they're recording us for everything now. I saw a new, I think it's DSAC that came out on Friday. It's some kind of digital partnership. So it's the formal partnership between the big social media platforms and the government. And I'll do a breakdown probably this week on Twitter about it. But the the membership portal that invites these companies to join, it's like you have to be a for-profit company, you have to have over $1 billion with a B profits, then we as the government will work with you to steal all this data.
Yeah. It's
It
a
is
social credit score
shocking.
system they're working to implement, I guess, right? Is that the direction that all that is going? Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
there is a part of me, just because the only thing we can control, right, is our own minds and the reality you create for yourself. So I've just decided I don't think it's materially healthy or good in my life to even worry about whatever the omnipotent, if I'm going to
Yeah.
get smited by, the alphabet soup, I guess that's going to happen. But until that does happen, I think it's our responsibility to just try and build the best futures we can. And that is through, awareness, autonomy, and trying to put our best foot forward.
Wow. Well, I'm excited about the possible secession from the Union. And it looks like y'all are actually probably the most likely candidate. I mean, every state that I know of has talked about it. Like Texas actually was its own country at one point in time, and they have a lot of good reasons why they could be their own country. Hawaii often talks about California. I mean, every state has its secessionist movement, but you guys are you guys are probably going to do that. It would be my guess at some point.
So, I do like to think when I set my mind to something, I like to finish it. So I am actually pretty serious about it. It might be something different to what is, being envisioned right now. Maybe it becomes territories with federations as the appetite grows. But we do know there is talk of national divorce. I think that's a useful way to frame things because people do understand. Oh, gee, if you're in an abusive relationship, we do recommend people leave those situations. We are in an abusive
That's a great
situation with the
way to
federal
frame it.
government. I would like to say I have irreconcilable differences, and I would like to go my own way. Now, of course, the federal government will say, you can't do that. And I'm like, you know what abusers say? Don't leave or I'll kill you. That's
Right.
not a good look. That is literally their argument, right? So here in New Hampshire, we've been doing a lot of interesting things. So we have approached it both like straight up trying to introduce constitutional amendments to have a vote to secede. We introduced that bill 3 years ago. We got our butts handed to us. We expected to, but we did get 13 out of the 400 state reps voted for it, which is not the worst start. There were 13 original colonies, so
Yeah.
you got to start somewhere.
Well,
Then,
actually, that brings up another, like, so how many, I mean, I know the original Free State Project, they were saying, well, if we can get 10,000 like-minded people to move there and then start getting elected and going into public office, we have a really good opportunity to, completely take over that government and change the direction. And how many would you say have moved to Hampshire to date?
So, I mean, the
I'm
estimates is around 7,000 that we can sort of generally verify.
okay.
We don't have like a members list, and
Yeah, sure, I
we all
understand
know
that.
your
Yeah.
audience. We're not the easiest people to pin down. It's not been the easiest database for me to build out over the years, but there's also a lot of people here that have now become allies. I think we have sort of radicalized, maybe sounds negative, but I mean it in a positive way, the Republican Party to some extent. We're still cutting budgets here. When they cut budgets, they cut them by like $1 billion, and they're real cuts. We have the best school choice programs in the nation. We have all these things that we're doing where we're trying to, for what we can't secede, we can nullify. And that's
Hmm.
sort of using the cannabis approach, right? So that was a very interesting win for states' rights over the years that people don't maybe think about as positively as they should. But when we legalized cannabis laws and medical marijuana and marijuana laws, the states basically just at some stage were like, well, screw you, feds, we're doing what we want, right? And
You're
then
right.
everyone was
Yeah.
like, oh, the feds can't really do as much as they threaten they can, right? And so we're going to start to do that with some other things, maybe the EPA, maybe the SEC. I would love to see New Hampshire really become a crypto capital, in the truest sense, where we could have banks who are coming and people who understand privacy and wealth protection, and like a Switzerland of yore before the IRS stuck their stinky
Mm.
little fingers in everyone's
Yes.
boxes. But sorry that it came out really dirty.
No, Switzerland got compromised. I know that 15 years ago or
But
so. Yep. Yep.
I think nullification is going to be a really interesting thing. And I think, to your point, the fact that we have all these different states with different flavors talking about either national divorce or independence is very powerful. Because I did a independence panel maybe a couple of years ago, and we had Texas, so from Texas, that's fairly conservative, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We had someone talking from Hawaii, I think, and Hawaii probably has the most legitimate claim. That was a queen, it was a monarch. They had their own tribes, their own language, their own cultures, and the Dole Company and,
Yes.
cronyism extraordinaire came in and just kind of like took the pineapples and the land, right?
Yeah.
But then in California, there are various flavors there. But California would be sort of a progressive one. So the interesting thing is when you start to say we have progressives who want to secede, we have conservatives who want to secede. Up here, we have yellow and gold and black. So we have the libertarians, the anarchists, the minarchists, the more libertarian folk who want their own thing too. So maybe it's the Chinese curse that we're living in
At
interesting
interesting
times, but
times. Yeah.
at least it's interesting.
Yeah. That curse. I lived in Asia for about a decade, and the truth behind that curse is that if the world is so interesting, the external world is so interesting, you won't do your inner work, and you're
Mm,
here to do inner work.
interesting.
So
Oh, I
that's
did not know that, and I
that's
appreciate that. Yeah, because I mean, we do live in the era of distraction.
Oh my God, it's so interesting. Yeah. And like I get up, I meditate and I spend time and I learn and I do my spiritual practices. And I'm like, that is what I'm really here for. And then of course the service, of course. But yeah. Yeah. So it's becoming more and more abundantly clear. Yeah, the federal government is nobody likes it anymore. Or how they, I mean, the truth, we're in the apocalypse, which just means the unveiling. And so more and more and more and more and more, the truth is coming out about all these our so-called leaders or people in power and position, or these corporations, or how the mechanisms of how they became so wealthy and so in control. Really very nefarious, dark stuff. And that's starting to, like, even, average people are going, whoa, that is not right. So we are, yeah. I tend to think that the United States is going to stay intact through this collapse. but I don't know. Texas could split off. Certainly, New Hampshire may. I don't know what'll happen to Puerto Rico or Hawaii, but we are in a descent because the scenario of hyperinflation and currency collapse, like when that happens, usually the government goes through a huge transition within a few months afterwards because who all the employees, who is going to go to work when your monthly salary buys you like a half day's worth of groceries. So the government will collapse.
Well,
So it's going
not
to be.
just that it'll collapse. I do think when we think about control or we talk about control, whenever I hear that word, I try and stop now and like really think about what is that. And I think the magic trick that the government has done, it's so insidious, right, is to actually claim so much power for itself over us, right? We actually self-correct and we give them a lot of power. And it's not to say the chilling effect is not real. I find I self-police now because I got banned off X for 6 months, and then you're like, actually it was a gift and I shouldn't have gone back, but like a fool I'm back there, and my engagement's so low now that I'm just like, why am I even just farting in the wind here? But there I am, right? But then you realize, oh, a lot of it's back to when we started and we were talking about fear and paranoia and like, where does it really come from? I think getting people to literally free their minds, right, from the fear paradigm. The government sells fear. That's how they control us. So the more we can go, actually, you don't control me because I ain't scared of you. I mean, maybe it's foolhardy, but I think if more of us kind of roll with that energy, first of all, I think it maddens them, right? Because they're like, oh no, right? And their propaganda is now, it has to become so absurd and so patently either bad, or the censorship is a tell too. With COVID, so many people were like, how did you know? Why were you right? And I was like, well, first of all, I don't trust them on anything. So that's easier in, right?
Yes, yeah.
But it was just like the minute they started censoring things in such an absurd fashion, I was like, how does that not make you uber, uber, uber skeptical?
Yeah.
If no one wants to talk about what's going on, there's probably something going
Going
on.
on. Well, let's go back to like a little bit more of the like. So if somebody's interested in New Hampshire, like what are property values like? You're describing. So Manchester's a pretty bigger city, and then lots of smaller cities and rural stuff, and you've got a variety of mountains or sea, or it sounds like you get a lot of different terrain and some interesting people and fantastic events that aren't going to be shut down due to pandemics.
Yes. Um,
Real estate
so
prices, day-to-day living.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, New Hampshire isn't as cheap as it used to be, but I think for the value proposition of what you can get, it is actually still cheap. One of the things I'm personally working on that I'll probably unveil in the next, couple of months is I do want to figure out a way to tokenize real estate and maybe do NFTs and get people to start investing. Because sometimes I look around and I'm like, how can like 600 acres for like $1 million or something. And you're like, well, come on. Like, if this really is the Switzerland of North America, like, we're still cheap. We're not as cheap as we used to be. Because of COVID and because a lot of people started moving out of the cities, we
Yeah.
did get a heavy influx of people, lots of cash buyers. The market is pretty hot. Like there was an open house here maybe in a town called Somersworth. It's a town, not really great for anything, but it is near the sea coast, which is kind of the wealthier areas. And I think there were 350 people went through the open house.
Oh my
There
gosh.
were, 10 written offers, and it sold for 50,000 over asking. So that reality is starting to happen. I get really sad because, I've been telling people to move here for 15 years. And even in 2017, when I bought my house, I have a little bit of land. We're at the top of the hill on a cul-de-sac, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. in the winter, there's even a view, and I got that for under 250. You're not going to find those
Not
anymore.
anymore. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there is value to be gotten here, and I just wrote a afterword for a new book that's coming out called Growing Liberty, and my pitch was basically like, imagine you're still getting in early on Switzerland. Like that is how I'm looking at everything here, because it is still quite rural. You can build and find a lot of land. It becomes really interesting when you pick a town and maybe your friends already on the zoning board. There are areas in New Hampshire that are not zoned at all. The town of Grafton, for example. There's a great zoning tool that a Free Stater developed where you can go and you can literally put in your zip code and you can see what the zoning is in that area. The quality of living is very, very high. So New Hampshire is typically ranked number one for the freest state in America. We beat Florida hands down. We have
For
much,
sure.
much better gun laws. Florida has red flag laws, homeschooling. They get a little socially
Yeah.
conservative and want to kind of tell people how to live their lives. I'm not really interested in that. I'm very live and let live ethos. Um, we have a nuclear plant here, so our energy costs should be able to come down. They're currently high, and I'm trying to figure out why. I think there's a embedded corruption story there that we need to get to the bottom of. But honestly, what I would recommend for people, so if people are listening and they're kind of like, oh, this sounds intriguing, what should I do? I would say, first of all, go to the website, go to fsp.org. That's for Free State Project, so fsp.org. There you can sign up like for the newsletter, so you start to get some information about us. But then we have two annual events. One is Liberty Forum. That'll be this weekend, and we're going to have like Tulsi Gabbard and Glenn Jacobs, who's the mayor of Knoxville, big Ron Paul guy from back in the day, Brian Kaplan, who did Freakonomics and is an
Oh, okay.
economist,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
a lot of just free staters doing cool stuff. Like there are so many people doing so many interesting things. I can't even do them justice. Come to that, or I would recommend an open invitation to you, Marjorie, to come to Pork Fest. So
I
that's
would, it's so intriguing to me. I would have to get over my coldness sense, but it just does sound so intriguing because I love that. I've always been attracted to gatherings where there are people who are their own people. They're have a
so
sense
Pork
of,
Fest
yeah.
is in summer. So I mean, you might need a hoodie at night, but during the day we can hang. It's warm and sunny. It's up in the mountains. It's a camping event. It's a week long. There are hotels in the area for folks who don't want to sleep under or on rocks
I'm a
anymore,
camper.
like
Yeah.
me. Uh,
Like you, right?
but
Yeah.
that's the third week in June, and people can find tickets at PORC. That's like porcupine porkfest.com. But I find if people come and they meet the community, they usually like find their tribe or their sub tribe within the freedom folk. It's a good way to kind of tap in. And then I think long term, what I would like to see happen is if New Hampshire can become sort of this homeland, this base, right? Like sort of the Mecca, the promised land, whatever narrative or, wording we want to put around it. But I've always thought of it as a beacon of liberty. Like if we can create one place and maybe people become citizens of this new Arcadia, whatever,
Yeah.
new New Hampshire, I
Well,
don't know,
it's
everyone
an
else.
example. It's an example of like, hey,
Right. And people could
this.
say, I'm going to choose this domicile because I want these freedoms. And then it'll become contractual. And if we can attach that to the blockchain, so now we have verifiable contracts, I think we're so on the cusp of we're so on the cusp of starting a cool new country. Someone can help me do it.
I'll vote. Right. I actually, I joke around with people. I'm like, they're like, do you vote? And I'm like, if I want my vote to count, I'll learn how to hack the voting machine, right? Like, it's like apparently it's pretty easy. I've heard the code is pretty easy to break into.
It's
But
also, we always say here, what's the difference between a minarchist and an anarchist? And we're like 6 months in New Hampshire, everyone becomes an anarchist. But also, we're anarchists who vote because we vote for our friends. Like, I'm not going to vote for some dude where I'm like, I don't care, I don't know.
yeah,
But if you're an anarchist in West Manchester, where I live, and you're not voting for me, and I know who they are, I know them by name. I mean, I lost by less than 200 votes last time, right?
oh
So
yeah.
it does become important. I'm like, I'm all for your principles. I would never force someone to do something they don't want to do. But there's a difference between voting generically and voting for people you know.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Right. There's accountability, which is what government should be.
Should be.
It should be somebody you may not agree with them on everything, but at least, you've got the accountability stream there. Right
Right.
now, we don't actually. It's shocking how many of the politicians we have their acting career listed up on IMDb, and you can see that they went to acting school, and that's what they're doing. It's really shocking. Anyway, let's not complain about them. Thank you so much. Is there any final words you'd like to leave, or do you have a book you can pitch or something like that for folks? And uh,
I do have a book. My book's name is The Ecstatic Pessimist Stories of Hope Mostly. It's available on Amazon. It is wild and crazy like I am. It's like half I when I finished lawyering, I went back to school and I got my MFA in creative writing. So it's like award-winning short stories that are very angsty and deep. And then like speeches from New Hampshire and sort of stories about liberty here. I'm working on a new book that'll be coming out hopefully this year if I get my druthers together for that one. But I just encourage people, come to our events, sign up for the newsletter, fsp.org, reach out. Like, if people hear this, I'm on social media, follow my account, send me a DM. I'm happy to talk to folks. Don't send me dick pics, but feel free to reach out with like real questions or real conversations. And if people can make it to New Hampshire sometime, come meet the community. And if you have the means and you are never going to move, but you think what we're doing is cool, donate and help me buy properties to put more Free Staters in.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I'm so intrigued. I have sworn off traveling except for very special occasions, but man, this is really rising because I can tell there's something really special going on there. Well,
Awesome. We
thank you.
would love to have you. So
That'd be
keep
great.
me in mind and keep me posted and tell me how I could twist your arm.
Oh, there you go. All right. Well, thank you so much, Carla. I really, really appreciate your time. And Ryan, I hope that answered your questions. So, all right. Well, we'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Thanks.